In this tutorial I'm going to show you how to make this handy little wristlet in very easy stages. 2 zips, so we've got the pocket on the front and of course the zip on the top, and it's all fully lined as well. So let's get going. This is what you need to make it. For the front of my bag I've got 2 pieces of fabric for the outer fabric with my little elephants on, and these measure 3 inches by 7 inches. The zip goes in the middle here, and then the bottom section is 4 inches by 7 inches, and then I'll need 2 pieces of lining fabric cut to both the same size. The zips that go across there, I like to use a longer zip and cut them down because I find it easier to sew them in with the slider right out of the way. So I've got 2 zips that measure 9 inches, one for the centre and one for the top of my bag. For the back of my bag I've got another piece of the outer fabric and another piece of the lining fabric, but then I'll need a second piece of the lining fabric to go behind the front panel here. So those again measure 7 inches by 7 inches. That's going to be around about the size of my wristlet. The last thing that I need is a piece of ribbon to go around my wrist. So measure that around your hand just to make sure that you can take your hand in and out quite easily. So my piece actually measures about 18 inches in length. So the first thing we're going to do is to sew the zip in the centre of the front panel. So make sure your pattern's the right way up if you're using a pattern. I'm going to move that slider out of the way so I'm not sewing over it. Right sides together, put the zipper foot on my machine, and then sew down here. So that's the front of my bag now, and just to make it look even neater I'm just going to put a row of top stitches along either side here. Just straight stitches, keeping them as straight as I can because you'll see those stitches, and that'll help to keep the bag flat, and it'll help to keep the fabric flat on the inside there as well. So top stitch top and bottom there, and that keeps everything nice and flat and neat. And just to help me when I'm assembling the whole wristlet, I've sewn together by hand just over the end of the zip there. Now I'm going to put this section on top of one of the lining pieces, and that's now going to be treated as one piece of fabric, and it just means that when I open my zip I've got lining on the inside of the zip, but I've got lining that I can see behind it as well. So just to hold those pieces together I'm going to put a few stitches really close to the edge, just so that it doesn't move when I put the front to the back. It doesn't have to be all the way around, and very close to the edge so you're not going to see these stitches inside the seams. I'm not worried about the fabric twisting a little bit either, it does tend to do that, because I'm not going to wear this after all, so if the bag does end up slightly smaller, it doesn't really matter. So the second thing to do, or the next thing to do, is to put the zip across the top of the bag. Now remember, this is going to be treated as one piece of fabric. So just like we did with the zip across the front, you can have the zip facing the other way if you like, it's quite novel. Face down, and then stitch straight across the top. I'm going to move that slider out of the way again, just to make it easier to sew. And you've got quite a few layers, so take it easy with your sewing machine now. Go slowly. Pin that if you want to, zipper foot, or hand tack it again if you really want to make it secure. So just put my zip foot back on the machine. There. And so again, just using the side of the zipper foot pushed up against the coil of the zip, so I know I'm sewing it in a straight line. Like so. And then the second side, make sure again the pattern's the right way round. goes on the opposite side of the zip there, so if it gets a little bit confusing, just lay it out as if the bag's open, making sure your fabrics are facing the right way. Flip that over, line up the sides of the bag as close as you can again, and do the same down this side of the zip. So that's how we're looking at the moment. Then the lining, just like we did with the smaller zip here, is going to go on the opposite sides of the pieces we've just sewn. So again, if that gets a little bit confusing, lay your lining pieces out first, flip it over, and sew on the opposite side to the zip. So the zip's sandwiched in between the lining and the outside of the fabric, and then we'll sew both pieces of lining to either side of the zip. So that's my top zip sewn in. This time don't top stitch around there because that can interfere with turning the bag the right way out when we're sewing the pieces together. So I'm again with the zip on the top, just to make things a little bit easier, I'm going to hand sew the end of it together, and then I can move the slider out of the way so I can get a neater stitch as I'm sewing around my little wristlet. And it doesn't matter about taking these stitches out either, they'll be in the seam so you're not going to see them. So just sew over there a few times. Then I can trim off the ends of my zip. Don't do that if it's a metal zip. And then we'll sew the bag together. I need to put on my loop of ribbon, and I'm going to sit that just underneath the zip. You could sit it straight on top, but I like it kind of to one side, and that's going to face inwards. That's a little bit too long actually. It's going to face inwards from the side. So you can pin that in place, or sew that in place if you like. Don't go through the lining with that one though. That's okay. So just put a couple of stitches on there just to hold it in place. Like that. And then we'll change over to the standard foot on your sewing machine again. And this is the final part. Now make sure when you're sewing this together that you're not going to sew over the top of the ribbon on the other side. So if it's quite long, you can simply tuck that out of the way. And you'll need to take your right sides together, open out the whole bag with the wrong sides together. The zip will want to fold one way or the other. I'd fold that in towards the lining. Doesn't really matter as long as both ends go the same way. Make sure the sides meet up so you can pop a few pins to keep those in place if you wish. There you go. And then you're going to sew all the way around all four sides, but leave a gap at the bottom of around about 4 inches so that you can turn it inside out. And I'm just using about a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Those are the tacking stitches down the side that I said you're not going to see when it's all sewn together, because they're inside the seam. When you come down to the bottom, leave your needle in the down position so you can pivot it around, and just make sure everything's kept nice and square as you're sewing. That's where I left the gap across the bottom for turning, so I'm just going to snip across the corners before I do so, just to take away a little bit of the bulk of the fabric so my points are nice and neat. Try and remember to leave the zip open, the centre zip, so that you can turn it the right way around. If you haven't, you can kind of fiddle around inside there until you find the slider and push that open. Alright, there you go. And then pull it all through that opening in the bottom of the lining. So, push all of your corners out. Have the iron at the ready to press it. There's my ribbon to go around my wrist. Just before I pop the lining inside, I'm just going to sew over the top of that on my sewing machine. You can sew by hand if you want it to be really neat, but nobody's really going to see inside the lining of your bag. So fold the two sides over so that they match up with the seam, and then just sew straight across that on your sewing machine. And then you'll push the lining inside the bag, push out those top corners, take it over to your iron and give it a bit of a press. Make sure you cut off all of your loose threads if there are any, so it's nice and neat. And that's done. So again, I'll press that in just a second, you'll see that better in a moment. Handy because it's around your wrist that you can still use your hands. If you wanted to decorate that even more, you could put a bow or a button. I might do this actually, put a little bow on the side of the handle there. It's nice and professionally finished because the pocket is lined on the inside of the pocket and you can see the lining behind there as well. And then of course on the inside here, nicely lined on both sides. So it's somewhere to keep your hankies, your mobile phone, your loose change, or make it in matching, coordinating colours for your bridesmaids' dresses as well, and that'll be somewhere for them to keep their confetti. I'm just going to hand sew that just onto the end of my ribbon just there, because I think that'll look quite sweet. Could put a button over the top as well if you wanted to, but I just think that bow's going to finish it off really nicely. Just make sure it's symmetrical. And the little V shape at the bottom of the ribbon, not just decorative, but that helps to stop it fraying. That's going to sit there. And I'm just hand sewing from behind the bow so you don't see any of the stitches. And from the other side so it's nice and secure. There, just knot off my thread. That's better.